Hi there, my name's Kerry. I'm a peak performance coach, and one of the areas I specialize in is bereavement. The reason being that 18 years ago we lost our younger daughter Kerry, and so I'm going to start speaking to you today in this month of June, where I'm concentrating on grief, bereavement, our journey through loss. I'm starting today by actually telling our story. It's interesting that because it happened 18 years ago, a lot of things have come into perspective as to what really happened and how we see things very differently now from when they initially happened to us. So our 9-year-old Kerry was diagnosed with a non-malignant tumor in her brain, actually on her pituitary gland, and needed to be operated on. Obviously, the pituitary gland is the center of all the chemicals and hormones that happen in the body. So if that is not functioning properly, then your whole body doesn't function properly. So anyway, it was diagnosed that she had a tumor on her pituitary gland. And between the time that it was diagnosed and the operation time, there were many tests that we had to take her to, quite scary ones, like having to have an MRI. And my goal was to get her to the op in a very calm state, with me myself not being particularly good about medical things, so it was a huge challenge for me. And I do remember once at home being in floods of tears because of the test that we had to take her to do. And on the way to the school, which isn't very far away from us, I just prayed for calm over and over and over again. I said, please Lord, just give me the calm that I need. And as I drove into the gates of the school, that calm descended. How amazing is that? Anyway, the one thing that Kerry did mention before she went into the op, both to my husband and myself, was that one of her friends said that she might die. And was that the truth? So obviously Mark and I would have reassured her, told her that that wasn't a possibility, because we wanted to keep her very calm. So she had her operation in 2002 on Valentine's Day, a Thursday. The night before, we had a really special Valentine's supper, which for a few Valentines after that, we would cook the same sentimental supper in honor of her. The op was very long, but it was successful. And so that on the Friday morning, we took Kathleen to school, our older daughter Kathleen, and then Mike and I spent the day with her on the ward, and we soothed her and we massaged her feet and hands. We read stories to her, and then once Kathleen was out of school, we brought Kath down to see her on the Friday night. On the Saturday, so let me get back to the Friday. When you have a brain op, very often you aren't able to speak for a few days after the op, I think just because of the trauma of the brain. And the nursing sister was explaining that to Mike and I. And Kerry, being a chatterbox of note, thought she would just show them that in fact she could speak. So even though her op was on the Thursday, on the Friday morning she had already started to speak just a little, but made perfect sense. Anyway, the Saturday morning arrived, and we decided that we would take it in turns to be with Kerry. I took the first shift, and Mike and Kathleen went off to the museum, which was close to the hospital. And it was during that shift on the Saturday morning that she stopped breathing. Very peaceful. It was like 2 little intakes, and then one very long breathe out, and then she never breathed again. So obviously then it was a big rush. The doctors came in, there was a lot of scurrying around. I was jetted out of the ICU, and they took her down immediately for some scans, and she never recovered after that. And in fact, on that Saturday night, in the middle of the night, we were phoned by the nursing sister on duty to tell us that she thinks that we must come. And so we made our way down in the dark in the middle of the night to go and be with her. By the time the next morning came, My husband, he I think already realized that actually she was only being kept alive by machines. We phoned family members, and we have huge families. We phoned my very two best friends, my rocks that I would have battled without them. Our minister and his wife came to be with us as well. So there were lots of people with us from probably 6 o'clock in the morning. And we had a light breakfast, and then the doctor, who's a good friend of ours, asked please to speak to us, where he told us that essentially Kerry was brain dead. What a shock. And I just remember initial absolute panic, and then it was like a calm came over me, and I felt like I was watching myself in a movie. Lots of people I think have mentioned a similar thing. They feel that they are up above themselves looking down, and that is definitely the feeling that I got. We stayed behind at the hospital just to clear up a few formalities, including the fact that we would like to have our organs donated. And from then for the next few days, it was amazing, because my husband Mike and I didn't come unstuck with any decision we had to make. Very luckily, we both felt the same way about the decisions that had to be made. So it made a very stressful situation a lot less stressful. I do remember at her bedside, before the close family left, we were gathered around her bed, and it was the first time that I'd seen my father cry ever, and that was very moving for me. I also remember one of my close friends asking me, how on earth do you say goodbye to your daughter permanently? And those memories will always stay, like stuck in my brain. Anyhow, we then left the hospital empty-handed, which is a terrible way to be, and drove up the hill to Hilton, which is about 15 minutes away from the hospital. When we arrived home, there were obviously our family, huge as it is, was already here. I had asked friends of ours just to go to the local spa to order takeaway meals, and when the owner heard what had happened, he donated them for free. Amazing people. Anyway, so our daughter Kath was 12 at the time. Kerry died on a Sunday, and she wanted to go to school on the Monday. And I think it was a good decision, because what else would she have done? We were at home, lots of adults were coming to us, there were lots of things we had to do, and Kath would have been a kid kind of on her own. So we said, that's fine, you can go to school, and on the proviso that if you feel that you want to come home, just phone and we'll be there immediately. And Kath actually never had to make that phone call. She was amazing. What was also amazing was that as we drove up to the school, her little friends were all waiting for her, boys and girls. And because they knew Kerry as well, they were very good. They were very good for and to Kathleen. Anyway, we had a little memorial at the school, and then her teacher, Kerry's teacher, was amazing. She made the class, in fact the whole grade, draw on fabric painting squares. They had to paint something, and then her and her mother made it into a quilt, which is this one. Okay. She also, the teacher, had lost a brother herself, and so was maybe a bit more compassionate than most teachers. And so she left Kerry's little desk in their classroom with a candle on it for the term, the rest of the term, and then she took it away, which I thought was a lovely gesture on her behalf, and it allowed the children to kind of get used to the idea that she wasn't there anymore. So then we get to the day of the funeral. We were completely numb. There were lots of people who were at the funeral. There were lots of people who came to our home that I can't remember at all. The one thing that was really wonderful was, prior to the funeral taking place, people traveled from far and wide, which was really meaningful for us. Mark's sister Di came out from Australia. My sister Sandy came down from Botswana. We had nieces who flew out from London. Even though they were kind of students and not earning a huge amount of money, they made that effort, which was completely amazing. Also, one of Mark's friends, immediately he heard what had happened, got into his car and drove down immediately from Joburg, and then he was amazing. He was here at 6 o'clock in the morning until we went to bed at night. He packed the dishwasher, he boiled the kettle, he cut up pieces of food, whatever needed to be done, Neil did, which was really quite amazing, particularly because it was a man doing that caring. We often expect that of women. So we were very cosseted and loved during that time of the funeral and immediately afterwards. We tried also to go back to as many activities as we could while we were still numb, because if we're feeling nothing, well, we may as well go. So we went back to church, we went to galas, we went to school functions, so that it wouldn't become a really big thing. The longer we didn't do it, the more of a big thing it would have become. And I'm very glad we did it that way. It made it a lot easier. So we were gradually moving from being completely numb to where the pain starts making itself felt. And the pain was excruciating and agonizing, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to survive this pain. And a very dear friend of ours who'd also lost a child, she was asked by the church to walk alongside us, and she mentioned how the pain will come in waves. So you won't have that excruciating pain all the time. It'll come and then it'll subside. And during that time when it's subsiding, you heal a little bit, you gather your breath until the next one comes. And that for me was incredibly comforting, to know that I would be able to breathe in between. The other thing about pain or grief is that C.S. Lewis actually says that grieving is like the feeling of fear, and I certainly found that. For the first few mornings, in fact for a number of mornings after Kerry had died, I'd wake up in the morning feeling that I'd had this dreadful nightmare where our youngest daughter was dead, only to find out that it was actually true. And then the fear, which was like the grief, just washed over me, and that happened every morning for quite a long time. Our community was completely amazing. We live in a tiny village of Hilton, and a friend had organized that a different family would bring us our supper every single night for a whole month, which is what they did. I couldn't have tried to concentrate on practical things at all then. I was totally consumed with the emotions of the loss and trying just to get through every day. Society actually is broken in the way it deals with grief. Megan Devine mentions that in her book. Society expects us to be over it within a week or 2 weeks or a month, not realizing that we are forever changed after a very traumatic grief like that. We can still come back to being good and fully invested and love life, but we will be forever changed, and there will forever be a part of us that will belong to the person that has died. So we were trying now to start just maintaining every day, dealing with what had to be dealt with. I very luckily wasn't working at that time, and I don't think I would have been able to work, whereas I know for my husband it was very good for him to go back to work. He could kind of concentrate on work things instead of the grieving. So home was very silent. Kerry was a real chatterbox. There was an empty place at the dinner table. There were lots of very real, practical indications that Kerry was no longer with us. Very, very, very difficult to deal with. I left her bed made as it was for at least a month, if not longer. I didn't want to disturb that. I didn't want to disturb her room and the smell of her in the sheets, which I think also is a very common thing. So I didn't do anything unless I really felt I needed to. So Mark and I together, we would say, should we clear out her room? And if we didn't feel strong enough, we just didn't. And if we did feel strong enough, we did. So that's how we let our gut, our intuition guide us as to what we should or shouldn't do. So after a loss, there are what I call the aftershocks. That means that the loss is like an earthquake, and then after the initial loss, lots of other things come to batter you from side to side. It can be things like massive medical bills. It can be complicated relationships. It can be like now in COVID-19, where you can't go and retrieve the body of your child that's died because you're not allowed to travel there. So there are always aftershocks that come after a loss, and we were very blessed in that we didn't have massive aftershocks at all. The main aftershock that we had was in our relationship, which I'll discuss another day. We also, what was very painful for us was we lost quite a number of friends, which is also very common, because people are expecting you to be the same person you were, and how on earth can you be after such a major loss? Also, because we were dealing with a young daughter who was 9, I think some of the parents might have felt that it was contagious, and that if they were close with us, then maybe it would, because it happened to us, it could happen to them. So I do understand that the reason that they pulled away from us had to do with their things, their fears, but nonetheless, it was very painful for Mike and I to lose our daughter, and then on top of that, to lose friends as well. Eventually, the grief that was very public in our little village became private, until today, where Kerry actually resides right within our hearts. And that was a very sacred process for me, where instead of being open to everybody in the grief, we could actually make it our own and make it special. And a comment that was made during that time by a friend of mine was, "Thank you for being so generous in your grief." And what she was meaning was, we were very open about it. We did discuss it very openly, and that allowed the community to do the same. So we were lucky that we could speak about it. So now that it's 18 years later, what really helped us, and what do we love? So we love it when people speak about her and remember how funny she was, and remember things that she did. Even just to mention her in passing is lovely for us. We also are very touched when people remember her birthday or the anniversary of her death, because those days will always be marked by us, always. And then also, what I find really interesting is one of our niece's children who never knew Kerry, who never met her, whenever they come and visit, they always need to go into Kerry's memory box, which is a box my father made, and we've put all her little goodies into it. And these 3 children always come and they take out all the goodies and the letters and the funny little glasses and the little beads that she made, and they are always fascinated by the contents of Kerry's memory box, even though they never knew who Kerry was. Okay, so initially, grief definitely controls our emotions completely. In the first little while, I was always to be seen crying over the frozen peas in the spa. It would come up and I wouldn't try and control it. It was too exhausting to do that. But eventually, instead of the grief controlling you, you get to a place where you control the grief. For me, it was about 4 years, but there is no time limit, because for some people it's much less than that. Our older daughter Kathleen, I want to mention, is very much an introvert, and she dealt with Kerry's loss. As she matured, she could deal with it on a deeper and deeper level. So we made a pact that if any of us felt that the other one needed to have counseling, we would say that and we could recommend that. We did lots of things as a family. We wrote letters to Kerry. There was lots that we did as joint mourning without putting Kathleen on the spot at all. My husband really battled, but I'm going to be interviewing him later on in this month, and he can tell you about the difficulties that men face when it comes to grieving. So watch out for that one. The difficulties that we've experienced have been loss of relationships, friends, strained family relationships. I eventually stopped speaking about it, so I felt that my friends didn't need to hear it anymore. I'd probably bash their ears anyway. The other difficulty for me looking back was I don't think I was being as good a mother to Kathleen as I should have been, and I beat myself up about that quite a lot. And then, as I said, our marriage, which took a lot of strain. What helped me personally was I read a huge number of books so that I gained a lot of knowledge about grief. I always exercised, either walking or running on my own with my sunglasses on, crying behind my sunglasses so I thought no one could see it. Meantime, people told me afterwards a lot of people knew exactly what I was doing. So that really is the story of the immediate impact of the loss of our little Kerry on me. And I just wanted to share it with you in that this month of June, I'm going to be speaking a lot about grief. So next week I'm going to be speaking about is there a right and a wrong way to grieve? How is society determining what is acceptable or not? And the do's and don'ts when you're caring for a friend who is bereaved. The third week I'm going to be talking about what happens to our bodies when we grieve, physiologically and chemically. And are there only 5 stages to grieving, or are there more? The fourth week I'm going to be speaking about men and grief. The fifth week I'm going to be speaking about how we start re-engaging in life, not getting over it, re-engaging with life. And also as part of this month I have got interviews with 2 authors, Sue Brown, who lost her son when he was 10 and she has written a book about it, and then a lady from the UK called Annie Broadbent who lost her mum, and she's also written a book about it. So there's lots of information for you about grief. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comment box below. And I ask you to like this video, share it, and please to also join my YouTube channel, where there's a wealth of information, not only about grief, but about a lot of other things as well. As always, I thank you so much for joining me for this video.